Artificial intelligence is often described as weightless, seamless, and cloud-based, but AI is not floating in the air. It depends on physical infrastructure such as large data centers, cooling systems, power supplies, water resources, land, and transmission networks. Behind every generative AI system is a material footprint. This presentation examines a central ethical question: who benefits from AI expansion and who bears its cost? Our argument is that while generative AI delivers meaningful benefits to society, the environmental, public health, privacy, and security burdens created by the infrastructure that supports it are not shared equally. Instead, those burdens often fall on communities that are already politically underrepresented, environmentally burdened, or economically vulnerable. In this presentation, we will review the importance of AI infrastructure to understand why it matters and the unequal distribution of burdens and benefits on communities. We will discuss where organizational governance and legal frameworks fall short in managing data center infrastructure and the requirements needed for proper ethical governance.
To understand why this matters, it helps to begin with history. The United States has repeatedly justified disruptive infrastructure in the language of development, growth, and public good. Seneca Village in New York was cleared to make way for Central Park. Black Bottom in Detroit and the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul were cut through by highways. These were not empty or failed places. They were thriving communities with culture, businesses, trust, and social identity. Yet decisions made elsewhere reshaped them permanently. That history matters because it reveals a pattern. Infrastructure is often presented as progress at the national level, while loss is experienced locally. AI infrastructure may be newer, but the ethical pattern is familiar.
Generative AI has created real benefits in medicine, education, communication, research, and commerce. But those benefits depend on facilities that consume vast amounts of electricity and water, generate heat and noise, and require extensive land and utility access. AI ethics discussion often stay focused on algorithms, bias, and model outputs. Those are important concerns. However, if we ignore the physical infrastructure that enables AI, then we ignore where many of its harms actually land. The ethical question is no longer just how AI systems behave. It is also where they are built, who approves them, and whether the communities that host them have meaningful power in those decisions.
One of the clearest problems is that regulation has not kept pace with AI infrastructure growth. Large data centers fall under existing legal domains such as environmental law, energy regulation, land use planning, and permitting. But those frameworks were not designed for the scale and intensity of AI-driven demand. This creates a governance gap. Policymakers are trying to support innovation, but the rules often remain fragmented, outdated, or too narrow to address the cumulative impacts of modern AI infrastructure. As a result, critical facilities can move forward without a governance system fully equipped to evaluate their broader community consequences.
Distributive justice asks a basic question. Are benefits and harms allocated fairly? In AI infrastructure, the answer is often no. Businesses, consumers, and institutions may enjoy the productivity gains of AI across the broader economy, while specific host communities absorb the environmental, health, and infrastructure costs. That pattern is not simply unfortunate. It points to governance failure. When institutions repeatedly prioritize speed, efficiency, and investment over meaningful participation and cumulative impact review, unequal harm becomes normalized. Ethical analysis therefore requires us to look not only at the facilities themselves, but at the systems of decision-making that make these outcomes predictable.
Federal agencies such as the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission have become increasingly involved because AI data centers create extraordinary energy demand.
These agencies monitor grid reliability, promote efficiency, and support faster interconnection of large electrical loads. That shows regulators understand that AI is reshaping the power system, but the ethical tension remains. Much of this policy energy is focused on accelerating development and preserving competitiveness. That can mean the system becomes very good at helping data centers connect to the grid without becoming equally strong at asking whether nearby communities are being asked to absorb more risk, more pollution, or more infrastructure strain than others. Environmental law provides important safeguards, but it also has serious limits in this context. NEPA, or NEPA, requires environmental review, yet it is procedural. It can force agencies to study harm without forcing them to choose the least harmful option. The Clean Air Act addresses emissions from generators and fossil fuel-based energy support, but implementation often depends on states, and that can produce uneven protection across regions. The Clean Water Act matters because many data centers rely on large volumes of water for cooling, especially through evaporative systems. In water-stressed areas, that demand can strain local supply and wastewater infrastructure. So even when projects meet legal requirements, communities may still face concentrated environmental burdens. In other words, compliance does not automatically equal justice. AI infrastructure does not only create uneven burdens, it also supports uneven access to benefits. The digital divide is the gap between those who can fully access and benefit from digital technologies and those who cannot. Even as digital tools become more widespread, barriers remain. Unreliable broadband, limited digital literacy, weak institutional access, and lack of computational resources. Advanced AI services are often concentrated in already developed, well-resourced regions. That means some communities face exclusion from educational, economic, healthcare, and civic opportunities linked to AI, even when the broader digital economy grows around them. So the problem is not only who hosts AI infrastructure, it is also who is left out of what that infrastructure makes possible.
State and local governments are where many of these decisions become real. They control zoning, permitting, water use, emissions oversight, and environmental review at the implementation level. But states are also under pressure to attract investment, jobs, and economic development. That creates a structural conflict. The same officials asked to protect communities may also be incentivized to reduce barriers for industry. Ethically, this matters because infrastructure siting is not neutral. When weaker regulatory environments or cheaper land use make certain communities more attractive, the burden of AI expansion can be systematically shifted onto those with less political leverage.
Environmental justice helps explain why these patterns matter. AI data centers require massive electricity use, and when power generation depends on fossil fuels, communities may face higher emissions and health-related risk. Water-intensive cooling can strain local systems, especially in places not built for rapid industrial growth. Recent community concerns around large AI-related power infrastructure in places such as South Memphis shows how environmental burdens can cluster in historically marginalized neighborhoods. The benefits of AI may be national or even global, but the costs remain intensely local. That mismatch between broad benefit and concentrated burden is one of the clearest ethical warning signs in this entire discussion.
Privacy risks of AI infrastructure extend beyond the end users whose data may be processed inside these data centers. These facilities generate large amounts of operational and environmental data like smart meter readings, cooling system data, access logs, visitor records, and perimeter monitoring. On paper, much of this may be classified as non-personal. However, in practice, when combined with other datasets, It can reveal patterns about neighborhood activity, traffic movement, and community behavior. The ethical concern is what privacy scholars describe as surveillance spillover. Monitoring justified for facility operations can expand into broader forms of observation that nearby communities never meaningfully consented to. AI data centers increasingly function like critical infrastructure because they depend on continuous power, water, cooling, and connectivity. That also makes them attractive targets for cyber attacks, supply chain compromise, or operational failure. If a major facility is disrupted, the consequences may extend beyond the building itself to local power reliability, water systems, and emergency response capacity. These risks are not distributed equally. Communities with fewer resources and less infrastructure redundancy are more vulnerable to disruption. Responsibility is also fragmented across operators, utilities, contractors, cloud providers, and vendors. When accountability is dispersed, it becomes easier for everyone to meet minimum requirements while no one fully owns the community level risk.
The rapid expansion of AI raises a deeper governance question. How much computing capacity should societies build, and under what ethical conditions? More capacity may support advances in healthcare, scientific discovery, and public services, but it also increases demand for land, water, energy, and industrial support. AI is also dual use. The same infrastructure that enables beneficial applications can support surveillance, military uses, or other harmful ends. This is why the precautionary principle matters. When credible risk to human health, the environment, or community well-being are foreseeable, policymakers should not wait for complete certainty before acting. Ethical governance should be preventative, not merely reactive, especially when the harms are likely to fall on those with the least power to resist them.
Developers tend to prioritize sites with cheaper land, lower utility costs, and fewer regulatory barriers. That may make economic sense, but it can deepen existing inequality. Wealthier and technologically mature regions are often better positioned to capture AI-related opportunity, while marginalized communities may receive fewer direct benefits. In this way, AI infrastructure can reinforce the very inequalities that ethical AI rhetoric claims to reduce. Communities may host the physical costs of expansion without gaining equivalent access to jobs, tools, educational resources, or decision-making power. The result is a system where innovation appears inclusive at the top level, but remains exclusionary on the ground.
The lived experience of artificial intelligence infrastructure is easy to overlook when the conversation stays abstract. For nearby residents, these facilities are not just symbols of innovation. They can mean constant noise, construction activity, traffic, heat, and anxiety about air quality or water use. Communities already facing environmental stress are less able to absorb new burdens. From a public health perspective, that matters. Exposure to pollution, elevated temperatures, and environmental strain is associated with respiratory illness, cardiovascular disease, and heat-related health risks. The ethical issue is not simply that these harms exist. It is that they are more likely to accumulate in communities already dealing with disadvantage. Quantitative data matters, but it does not fully capture what residents experience day to day. Community testimony often highlights impacts that technical assessments underestimate. Long construction periods, disrupted routines, noise, uncertainty, and fear about long-term health effects. Just as important, many of the communities most affected by new infrastructure have limited influence over planning decisions. Public meetings and formal comment process do not always produce meaningful participation. When residents feel excluded, mistrust grows. Ethically, that is a problem of dignity and procedural justice. People should not be treated as passive participants of infrastructure decisions that reshape the conditions of their daily lives.
The core argument of this presentation is simple, even if its implications are not. Generative AI produces real benefits, but the infrastructure that supports it also produces real harms, and those harms are not shared equally. They are concentrated in communities that are often already burdened and underrepresented in governance. That means the issue is not only technical, it is also ethical. If AI is to serve the public good, governance must move beyond abstract ideals and into enforceable protections. That includes cumulative impact assessments, meaningful community participation, stronger privacy safeguards, security standards calibrated to community consequences, and more equitable sharing of benefits. AI is not only made of code, it is also made of buildings, land, power, water, and people. And any ethical future for AI must begin by protecting the communities where its infrastructure becomes a physical reality.